My name is Scott Powell. I'm a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, and I'm joined by Bill Perry here. And this is the second in a series on China. And what we're going to talk about now is how the Chinese economy and trade policy has changed in the last 30 years, Bill.
Yeah. I think
that's what we're going to talk about. So let's just talk about that segment, and then we'll go into details.
Okay. I think let's look at it from both the Chinese side and then the U.S. side. From the Chinese side, the big thing was the movement by Deng Xiaoping to open up the economy. But it wasn't just opening up. There's supposedly the great economic guru who really led to the explosion of growth in China was the vice minister, Zhu Rongji. Zhu Rongji was under Jiang Zemin. He was a brilliant economist. He's the one who got China into the WTO. Mm-hmm. But the whole point was there was a meeting in the late, would be the late 90s. I'm trying to remember if I've got it right now, or maybe it was the late 80s. I'm sorry, late 80s in Shanghai by Deng Xiaoping and Zhu Rongji. Zhu Rongji came very happy out of that meeting, saying he wants to move to market. Zhu Rongji understood the power of capitalism, the power of a market economy, the power of pulling the shackles off of China. Understand, Russia many centuries ago used to call China a country of merchants. Capitalism is in the Chinese blood. I once mentioned to a major Chinese official, I didn't think China could ever give up capitalism because you're too good at it. And there were literally companies starting up all over the place. And then I saw that when I was doing these trade cases. And the problem was every single company was starting, just everywhere. And you had an explosion of entrepreneurial stuff. And that's what created all this wealth for China. And you had lower cost hourly wages. You had a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit in China. And all of a sudden, as one Chinese friend of mine said at the Canton Fair in Guangzhou, we're like the Wild West. And it was just an explosion of economic activity. But then what happened is after Zhu Rongji, who got us into and Zhu Rongji's whole idea was to move the economy away from the state-controlled economies, like Sinochem and some of the big state-run companies, and move it more and more to the market economy country. And that's 80% of employment is in the market economy companies. But after Zhu Rongji, the Chinese Communist Party started to back away from that under Hu Jintao.
When would that have been about?
That was probably around the middle 2000 when they started to slowly move backwards. Hu Jintao did it, et cetera. They didn't open up as fast as they had under Zhu Rongji. But then what happened is under Xi, we have a huge movement backwards. I remember talking to a senior official at Boeing who's Chinese from China. And this was about 10 years ago. And he said, China can't stop the opening now. I'm sorry. Xi Jinping has stopped it. And this is the whole point. Its whole movement of trying to move the economy away from the private market-oriented companies into state-run companies. And now we talk a little bit about the U.S. reaction to this. And China, the United States has always been aggressive with its trade laws with China. And they basically use anti-dumping, countervailing duties, Section 201, Section 301, and we'll talk about 301 in a moment because that's the important change under Trump. Under dumping and countervailing duties, the difference is basically dumping is when you're selling at prices below prices in your home market. But the Commerce Department looks at China completely different. You're a non-market economy country. So we're not going to basically use actual prices and costs in China to determine whether you're dumping. We're going to construct a cost. And this is like Alice in Wonderland, frankly, truly, when you deal with the Commerce Department policy in China. Under the WTO agreement with China, China was supposed to become a market economy in 15 years and use the actual prices. That didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen, in large part, was Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was moving the economy more and more away from the private industry to the that.
Now, wasn't there another benefit they had? Under the WTO status, wasn't China put in the category of a developing nation, and so they got preferential treatment? Tell us about that.
Well, they really didn't, they were never under the general system of preferences, so they really never got that much benefit. But the real problem was psychological. Charlene Barshevsky was a negotiator for Clinton with the China WTO agreement. A year ago at the Asia Society, she stated, the Chinese government has broken every single WTO agreement it signed. Lawyers in China have said, we don't have to follow all these treaties because we're a developing country, and these are unequal treaties, so we don't have to follow any of the treaties that we sign. This is part of the idea. This is really a problem because in international negotiations, you're supposed to have a treaty, but if the Chinese Communist Party is saying, we're not going to follow them, that creates a huge problem. And in what happened trade-wise is, and you've got to go back, and this is important to understand, Clinton, you had the WTO agreement. People were hoping that by getting China more integrated in the world economy, giving it a seat at the United Nations, they would at least become semi-friendly. Semi-friendly is what I think. But it's changed. And then first that was under Clinton, under George W. Bush. Bush said, I think we have a good relationship with China. Now, with Obama, it's very different. And the really interesting thing was how China looked down upon Obama. All the world leaders fly into China. They get red carpet treatment for coming out of the airplane. Obama flies in, no greeting, no red carpet, no nothing. He still comes down from the airplane. He has the famous Chinese pianist at the White House called Lang Lang. And what does Lang Lang do? He plays a song, and Obama's all clapping away. But it's from a very famous movie about the victory of the Chinese over the Americans in the Korean War. And Obama didn't even realize that was going on. All the Chinese did. Chinese were calling my wife and saying, well, what's going on? Why didn't the Americans pick this up? Now, under Trump, different. Real respect for Donald Trump. The first trip to China that Donald Trump made was in November, and it would have been 2017. And I was in Beijing at the time. He arrives, red carpet treatment. They really respected him, came out with red carpets and everything else. And then Trump had a meeting with Xi Jinping and the higher Chinese leaders with only him and Bob Lighthizer. And Lighthizer went down all the trade violations China had made. And supposedly the Chinese leadership was stunned. They saw a much more aggressive person in Donald Trump. This wasn't going to be business as usual, like it had been in other administrations. And so then what happened, this is where you come into 301. Lighthizer in his confirmation hearings to become USTR said, I don't think the US government has used 301 enough.
Explain what 301 is.
301 is basically where it's a specific provision of the trade law that lets the president take actions, trade actions, to counter unfair trade practices abroad. And the big unfair trade practice, of course, was the theft of intellectual property. That was huge. I mean, they've been taking billions of dollars in theft of intellectual property. So, first, Trump starts in a limited way, 25% tariffs and about 25 to 50 billion. There's a $500 billion trade deficit with China. So they start with a 25 to 50 billion. China gets all upset and retaliates. So we're going to hit 50 billion of imports from the US. Mm-hmm. Then Trump keeps escalating. And because there were so many different, the trade negotiations continued with China, then fell apart, then came back. Now we have 25% tariffs on 375 billion from China. That is a big difference for China. All of a sudden they're feeling real pressure. And of course, we get to the next segment, we'll talk about it from the political point of view, the policy point of view.
Are there other avenues of bringing international pressure on China that can not only help the United States, but help our Western allies?
The Western allies, Australia, Japan, Korea, they're getting together now. I mean, there's real fear. They can see the rise in China. I think COVID has also sped it up, the reaction of the Japanese government, for instance. The Chinese government is trying to take some of their islands, the Senkaku Islands. Mm-hmm. There have actually been military confrontations there. China had a military confrontation recently with India on the border. Mm-hmm. They've also threatened Australia because Australia wanted an international investigation of the COVID epidemic, and basically China retaliated against them. South Korea is also very concerned. All of the neighbors around China are very concerned. And then the United States, especially in the Trump administration, was working with those allies. The Europeans are concerned. The whole assertion by China in the South China Sea has led to all these European countries getting involved.
So what are you advising your clients now with regard to their presence in China, their continuing business in China, and what the alternatives are?
My advice to them has been move if you can. And that's the if you can, but move. And many U.S. companies are moving out of China. Not only U.S. companies, but Japanese companies. There's even new Japanese laws to incentivize Japanese companies to move their production out of China to a third country. So what's happening is a lot of companies are moving out of China, moving to third countries. And I'll talk, one thing to remember is the big high-tech problem, but to move all this stuff out of China. But the problem is for certain U.S. companies, especially in the lower cost electronics area, there is no alternative. So they're still in China working. But this is the problem, is one banker recently told me that a lot of people can make a lot of money in China. That's true, but now we are in a much different situation with China than before. Let's talk a little bit about high tech.
Yes.
I mean, we have to understand that in the high tech area, this is really a big deal. And the Chinese have been stealing a lot of the technology, the high technology, and they're dependent upon the U.S. for semiconductor chips. The U.S. Commerce Department has something called export control regulations. And the export control regulations are to limit exports of technology, either in knowledge in somebody's head, in paper, or in products themselves, to China and other communist countries. Under Trump, the United States become very aggressive, stop the export of semiconductor chips to Huawei, et cetera. The big semiconductor company in China, one of the biggest is in Taiwan. When I talked 3 or 4 years ago, I was on a big conference call and mentioned the export control guys. The guy from Taiwan, blew out, no big deal. Now it closed down all of its production in Taiwan, is moving production out of the United States to the United States and elsewhere, because there's too much pressure now. But the real problem here, again, is in the high technology battles is where it's going to be just unbelievable. And this is where the real problem, because that high technology feeds right into the military industrial complex. One of the things you've also got to understand, the last 2 years, there's a big change in Chinese law. Under Chinese law now, if you're a U.S. company with a subsidiary in China, the Chinese government has the right to go into all your computer servers and take whatever on it. In other words, you're at Boeing China, or let's say Google China. It has an R&D facility in China. So the police show up with guns, say, we want to go and look at your computer servers. And they have the right to do so under the law. They can take anything on that computer server and give it to the Chinese government. The other thing they can do is even put bots on those servers so they can get information from Google USA. So I don't understand how Microsoft, Amazon, Google, how they can have subsidiaries in China when the Chinese government has access to all their confidential information in China by law.
Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So do you think we can decouple from China, address decoupling, and what impact it would have? How far can we decouple? How much can business really be changed?
Well, that's the $24, what is it, the $1 million question?
Yeah.
Decoupling is already happening. In other words, companies are moving out of China. One of the big things is importers are moving out of China. To give you an example of how much of a big impact this did, when the COVID virus finally stopped in Wuhan, the workers in Wuhan got on the train and went down to their jobs in Shenzhen in the southern part of China, outside of Guangzhou. They got there were no orders. So they ended up coming back to Wuhan. Why? Importers have stopped buying from China. A lot of them have. Some of them have no choice and will continue to import from China, but a lot of them have stopped. And so this was a lot of these also labor-intensive industries where they were employing a lot of people. So that's been the problem. But an example was we had heard, and the other problem you've got to remember is Walmart. What is Walmart saying? Low prices always, right? And so Their whole point is they're trying to get low prices. So they have started moving a lot of their sourcing away from China to other third countries, Vietnam, Thailand, Southeast Asian countries, India, Latin America, et cetera. But there was even talk that Apple had moved about half of its production out of China to India. But now the rumors are that it may go back to China again. Why? It's difficult to do business in India. They can be ideological. At the business-to-business level, Chinese merchants and Chinese producers are very pragmatic. I don't want to say capitalistic, I want to say pragmatic. And they know how to do a contract, fulfill the contract, produce a product quality to meet the specifications, and keep the prices low. And they will deliver on time. So for many importers, many companies that do business in China, it's really, you can do business there. It's much more difficult in other countries like India.
Let's close on your addressing the impact of the trade war against China.
Well, the impact of the change,
And how have things changed, if they've changed, under the new President Biden?
Well, under Biden right now, it looks like he's going to continue the trade policies of Trump. There's no indication yet that he's lifting the 25% tariffs on $325 billion. But in the next several days, there's a meeting up in Alaska, and the Foreign Ministry, Wang Yi, will be there with high-level officials of the Biden administration, and then you never know what will happen there. But hopefully, they'll stay there. But Biden is starting to loosen some of the controls on China. Understand one of the biggest problems Biden has. Biden may have, certainly his son probably got money out of China. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he would like to be nice to China, but he has a problem in his own party. When Donald Trump gave his State of the Union address in the Congress, as you remember, Democrats all sat on their hands, but there was one statement by Trump that caused the entire Congress, including all the Democrats, to stand up: a tough trade deal with China. Many Democrats are concerned about China. And because of that, 70% of the Americans right now are very concerned about China. COVID, everything else that's going on. COVID changed the perception of China around the world. And it's having that impact. So that means Biden has less and less political room to maneuver with China. They want to be much tougher on him. And I think that may continue under Biden.
Well, Bill, I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and thanks for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.